everybody. This is Jade with the Octopus Literary Podcast, and this week we are covering the last three chapters, so chapters 16, 17, and 18 of Old Man's War by John Scalzi. And let's just get started. So, when we pick up in chapter 16, John is on the planet that has been set aside for the humans' parley with the Kansu. So just as a recap, what they're doing is 5 Kansu will face 5 human special forces in battle, one-on-one, using only knives, and however many Kansu the humans are able to kill in one-on-one combat is the number of questions that they're able to ask the Kansu and be answered honestly. If the Kansu win, then the Kansu who did the winning gets to go free. The Kansu here are made up of basically criminals on death row. So the first Kansu who speaks, who is the ambassador, he is also one of these criminals, but he says that he craves death and a term of just punishment before my rebirth, which is one of a million references to that the Kansu make to the afterlife and reincarnation, which is their whole deal. They're religious zealots. So the ambassador recaps the rules of engagement to John and the rest of the Special Forces soldiers. They brought 37 Special Forces soldiers with them, but the Kansu pick 5 random ones. They don't put any real thought into who they choose. It says, to them, one of us was as good as another. So, seeing where this goes with the Kansu getting mostly brutally murdered by the humans, they are a bit cocky, and you can see why they would become a bit cocky, since they basically rule the universe. There's no other species that the humans know who are remotely as technologically advanced as the Kansu, but they're not infallible, right? They believe that they could kill anybody they need to, and that is kind of bad for them. So, of course, one of the fighters chosen by the Kansu is Jane. So, the 5 Special Forces soldiers who are selected fight their respective Kansu one by one, and we see these battles, and they're awesome, right? They're only about a paragraph a piece, but the first one is over in like 10 seconds. The second one is also over in like 10 seconds, and the second one ends with Goodall grinned all the way back to his side, dancing a jig as he went. He clearly had fun. So we know that the humans really have the upper hand in hand-to-hand combat here. But then we get to the third fight where Aquinas really struggles to kill the opposing Kansu, and she actually gets like really, really injured, pretty much completely disabled, although she is able to squeak out a victory. And John makes an observation here that the Special Forces soldiers, because they know they can get any of their limbs regrown, they don't fear death the same way that humans do. They still fear death, but they are willing to lose multiple limbs in order to achieve victory because they know they can just get it back. I believe Aquinas takes like 3 days to get her arms grown back. So it causes the Special Forces soldiers to behave differently than regular humans do. And this is just another beat of how John is an outsider to these people. He's definitely closer to them than many of the other soldiers, but that doesn't make him one of them. The fourth fight is actually lost by the humans, and the human who dies is pretty much decimated. He's brutally torn apart, and this is, of course, set up to make John and us feel the most nervous for Jane. We know at this point that the book is almost over, and even though I wasn't really thinking that Jane would just get off by some random no-name Kansu, it's still there in the back of your head as a threat, and it's definitely in the front of John's head. However, Jane doesn't even touch the opposing Khonsu. She just chucks her knife at his throat, and he dies immediately without ever making it within 10 feet of her. And this just sort of represents a very vast divide between Jane and John. John would have definitely gotten killed immediately by the Khonsu. No question. He admits it. We know. But Jane is by far the best combatant that we see here. Because she doesn't even participate in the fight, really. That puts her and John on opposite ends of some spectrum, which obviously is important given the nature of their relationship. So John is able to ask 4 questions of the Khonsu because they gained 4 victories. It says they actually only planned to have 2 questions, but hoped for 3, so nice. So John asks the questions, and they find that the Khonsu did provide the Ray with the technology to detect skip drives, but they didn't give the technology to anybody else, and nobody else has it other than the Khonsu that the humans know. And John asks, because they have an extra question, he asks, the Khonsu can wipe out most of the races in this area of space. Why don't you? And the ambassador says, because we love you. And he then proceeds to give a very, very Christian-esque speech about we are killing you all because we believe that you will become part of our religion eventually, and that this death will purify you. And by Christian-esque, I do mean Christians in fiction or in extremist factions, not real Christians. But they talk about how killing these species brings them closer to some purification that, as far as I can tell, is reincarnation literally as Khonsu. And the thing is, so the ambassador says, the time in which your people will be worthy to join us will be that much closer now. And like I said before about the Khonsu, in lots of science fiction books, the religious nuts are treated as the backwards farmers still figuring out how to use a wheelbarrow. But the Khonsu are the most technologically advanced alien species that the humans can conceive of. If the Khonsu believe that they are causing some kind of reincarnation, I believe it. Because they are probably technologically advanced enough to know that. So that has some interesting implications for the rest of these books, but unfortunately it isn't addressed here. So John and the rest of the special forces, the surviving ones, go back to their ship, the Sparrowhawk, and they're talking to their superiors about what happened. And the plan for attacking Coral and reclaiming Coral is revealed, which is actually super, super cool. So their plan is to skip basically right into the upper atmosphere of the planet, get blown up, and fall out of the ship onto the planet's surface, just with little cocoons of nanites around them to keep them from burning up in atmosphere. This is badass. And it turns out that the reason they're able to do this is because for the last several days, the CDF has been sending in missiles to Coral space so that when the Ray tried to blow up any ships that skip in, they occasionally basically blow up mines. So this is causing them to hesitate every time they detect someone coming in on skip. So this is a super cool military strategy that makes me believe that the special forces are everything they're cracked up to be, and B, just really impressed with the efficiency and tactics of the CDF when they really are trying. Not that they haven't been trying in the rest of this book, but we haven't seen what the greater CDF tactical board comes up with or whatever. We just have largely seen individual skirmishes that the greater CDF wouldn't get involved in. So this is really cool. And at this point, after hearing their plan and calling them insane, the special forces, after John hears their plan and calls the special forces insane, Major Crick tells John that they're going to be sending him back to the Phoenix, which is the CDF main ship. It says, we'll leave you a month's worth of... It says, after this briefing, you'll be provided with a shuttle, and a skip drone will be dispatched back to Phoenix with your shuttle's coordinates and a request for retrieval. Phoenix keeps retrieval ships permanently stationed at skip distance. You should be picked up within a day. We'll leave you a month's worth of supplies, however. And the shuttle is equipped with its own emergency skip drones if it comes to that. So, even though they're ditching him, they're really going the extra mile to make sure he ends up back in Phoenix okay. So, it gives the impression that the special forces really did like John. They're just getting rid of him because they don't want him to die, which, point. But John really does want to stay with the special forces. In fact, he asks to stay. He tells them that they lost one of their soldiers fighting the Kansu, and he wants to take that Sergeant Hawking's place. What he doesn't know is that Sergeant Hawking was one of Jane's men, so he is assigned to Jane's squad, but he didn't even know that he would be assigned to Jane's squad. He just wants to stay with the special forces. And he states later that this is largely because he lost everybody he knows on Coral, minus Harry and Jesse. He wants to go back there and finish this job. And that is largely because of what he said last week about what he has in common with the special forces, which is that he is fighting for the guys next to him. And that is what he was able to connect to the special forces guys with. So his reasoning here for going back does actually place him close to the alignment of the special forces that he wants to be a part of. So in the case of this particular battle, he is truly one of them in a way. However, after this, when Jane does begrudgingly accept that John can be in her squad, but after this, she shows up to his room and basically tells him that she's very angry that he asked to stay, and she tried to arrange for him to be sent home safely because she wants him to not get hurt. And this conversation goes downhill really quickly, because even though I just said that John seems like he's becoming more like the special forces, the one way that you can always not be accepted by a new group that you want to be a part of is to say that you are already a part of their group. For example, here John says, I might as well be one of you, one of the special forces, so now I am. This really pisses Jane off, because even though John has the same reasons for fighting, there is so much more to who she is and the entire Ghost Brigade's way of life. And she is offended and angry. And so she says, you said you wanted to know about me. What part do you want to know? And that just kind of highlights that even though John told Jane he wanted to know more about her, and he would only tell her about Kathy if she swore she would tell him more about her, we haven't actually seen Jane talk about herself. And in fact, it doesn't seem like she has. John wants to tell her about Kathy, and he does want to know more about Jane, but Kathy is always his first priority, even subconsciously. So Jane starts to tell him about the hardships emotionally that being in the Special Forces creates. She says, "Do you want to know what it's like never to have been a child, or even to have seen one until you step foot on some burned out colony and see a dead one in front of you? Or maybe you'd like to know that every single Special Forces soldier dreams up a past for themselves. We know we're the Frankenstein monster. We know we're put together from bits and pieces of the dead. We look in a mirror and we know we're seeing somebody else, and the only reason we exist is because they don't, and that they are lost to us forever. So we imagine the person they could have been. We imagine their lives, their children, their husbands and wives, and we know that none of these things can ever be ours." So obviously this is a huge emotional weight for a person, but also it's something that John absolutely can't relate to. He did screw up here when he said that he was one of the Special Forces. He may be able to relate to them on a level, but he can never claim that he has gone through the same things that they did. But when Jane says, "We know that none of these things can ever be ours," and John has appeared in Jane's life, he has become closer to the Special Forces by like 5%, from away from the general human population. But when he appeared to Jane and provided some semblance of her former life, she went away from the Special Forces and towards the general humanity, 5% herself. So as much as they pull towards each other, they're pulling each other away from the categories that they originally were in. So at this point, Jane continues to almost yell at him over how difficult him being in her life has made her life. And she doesn't appear to regret that he has shown up, but it doesn't change the fact that it's made things harder for her. She talks about how difficult it is to know that he wants her to be someone else that she isn't, and how it makes her feel guilty, and how she wishes that she could have lived the life that Kathy did. And so John says, "You're not her." I said, "You said it to me yourself." And Jane responds, "I lied. I am her, and you know it. If she had lived, she'd have joined the CDF, and they would have used the same goddamn DNA to make her new body as they made me with. I've got souped up alien shit in my genes, but you're not fully human anymore either, and she wouldn't be either. The human part of me is the same as what it would be in her. All I'm missing is the memory. All I'm missing is my entire other life." And this is a really interesting statement to make, and it's the topic of a lot of science fiction books. Unfortunately, I already have an opinion on this topic, and I did really try to think about this from Jane's perspective, but I do disagree with her sentiment here, when she says that she is Kathy. Because we have an entire subset of humans who are exactly like clones, which is twins, of course. Twins lead separate lives, marry separate people, and have separate children, and we don't ignore this to say that they are the same person. You would never say that a pair of twins is the same person. Even with shared childhoods and genes, they have separate experiences and separate perspectives. Even if they are at the same place, they are still remembering it from a different point of view. But Jane has attached to this idea of being Kathy because she wants to. She's acutely aware of how different she is from a regular human at every turn, and she wants to fill that gap. If the Special Forces were completely isolated from humanity and never knew that they were missing anything or different, they would probably be all right. It's only with the shared knowledge that they are missing something and the fact that they have developed a shared desire to know about their past selves that she has jumped immediately to the idea that she must be Kathy Perry. All I'm missing is my entire other life, she says. But that's a lot. But John actually accepts this. And I think it's largely because he also wants her to be Kathy. This book, as I've said several times, is about a man who dearly misses his wife. And he wants her back in whatever capacity he can have her. So he doesn't disagree with her on the point that she is Kathy. And he just tells her that he wants to help her on the mission, and that he will stick close to her so that he can stay alive, which is what she wants. So then we could get into chapter 17, and the first part of this is just a lot of action. And even though it is really cool action, it's pretty easy to summarize, and there's not a lot to analyze here. So John is brain palling to and from Jane for most of this, but they fly into coral space, and they drop out from underneath the Sparrowhawk, and they are basically yanked down to the Earth. They cover themselves in nanomachines that burn up when they enter atmosphere, and as they come down to the planet's surface, they are completely undetected. They have definitely outsmarted the Ray here. The Ray, we have stated before, or rather the book has stated before, is roughly on the same level of technological advancement as humans. So getting little upper hands like this is completely within the realm of believability. During this time, John talks about how different the special forces are a little bit more. One of the things he talks about is how someone would tell a joke and everyone who heard it would laugh with their brain pal, and it was like being hit with little BBs of amusement tunneling in your skull. It gave me a headache because the special forces, everybody, but mostly the special forces, are able to transmit bursts of emotion through their brain pal as like an additional sense. And so I just wanted to pull this out because I really liked it. It shows that Scalzi is thinking about what people who are raised with this basically cyborgism implanted into them. They have completely adjusted to living life this way. In fact, they've been raised with it. And it's endearing for the special forces, but it also shows that John Scalzi cares about developing these people in the background. So one of the things that John talks about here also is that he is able to comprehend the speech of the special forces, which the special forces avoid speaking to him because he thinks and speaks so slowly, and they are communicating like 10 times faster. But he has found that if he just sort of turns off his thoughts and accepts their brainwaves, he is able to just let the information be filled into his brain. This alludes to the fact that the special forces don't actually have different physiology. They have the same physiology and the same brains as the old people. They're just the old people just aren't used to it. John is able to adjust to this. He's just kind of doesn't want to because of a lifetime of habit. So another little detail that's really neat is the Ray set up in the humans' command center so that they could take advantage of the power lines and cannibalize the command center's computing, transmitting, and other resources. And this seems like a tiny little beat, but remember how we talked about how most of the CDF technology comes from aliens, and how the aliens are just kind of passing technology around to each other every time they kill one of their planets? Basically, what we're saying here is the Ray, the humans, and whoever else is in their group of people who are always fighting each other have effectively mushed their technology so much together that they're pretty much able to just use each other's technology and mesh it in with their own, no problem. Which is a nice little detail that has remained consistent throughout this entire book. So, props. So John navigates down to the planet's surface. He takes out some targets on the way down. he meets up with the rest of his squad and is able to take down this large radio tower. And then the Rey are definitely aware that the humans are here. This was a surprise attack, and they were able to make a lot of it, but the surprise bit is over. And on that happy note, we jump to a flashback. Jane and John are eating dinner together in the mess area, and they're talking about basically what it's like for John to be human, and what he is going to do when he finishes his term. So he tells her that he intends to retire and colonize when he finishes fighting. He doesn't want to stay in the CDF after 8 more years, but still. And Jane says something really interesting, which is, it means going back to being weak and slow. And John responds, it's not that bad. So the interesting thing here is John joined the special force, the CDF, because he wanted to get away from the failing machine that was his body. He said that being weak and slow, effectively, was so horrible that he was willing to do anything to get away from it, and all of the old people were, which is how the CDF is able to recruit. But now, John, for the last 2 years, John has been tired, lonely, and emotionally exhausted. He's been deeply troubled by the things that have happened. He's either been fighting people that he doesn't want to fight, or everybody he knows dies. And at this point, he's fantasizing about being able to retire again. And we'll get back to this later on in the next chapter, but it just shows you where his head is at right now. So John asks Jane if she would ever want to stop fighting, and she says, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. And that's an interesting sentiment, because in many countries, when you join the military and you only stay for a little while, so you join when you're like 18 and you stay for a couple of years and then you leave, and a lot of these people, they don't know what to do with themselves. So Jane saying she doesn't know what to do with herself if she were to stop fighting at first appears like it's another tie to the special forces, but it really is just another tie from the special forces to young people fighting at the beginning of your life instead of the end, like the rest of the CDF. So they are actually still fairly close to humanity. So John says, if you ever change your mind, because she says she does not want to retire with him, I'll send you a postcard from wherever I retire. Come join me. We can live on a farm, plant some chickens, and raise some corn. So this is the plan that he made with Kathy right before she died. Jane says no, but it leads directly into this next section, which starts with, where the hell did I put that ammo clip? And I'm sure probably half the people reading this get this, but I didn't read it. I didn't notice it until probably the 3rd time I read this part. Kathy's last words were, where the hell did I put the vanilla? And this has come up several times. John thinks about it when he's transferring bodies. He thinks about it when he's looking at her grave, and he thinks about it when he's telling Jane about how Kathy died. Where the hell did I put the vanilla is a phrase that has haunted John for the last 8 years, 9 years, 10 years by now. And Jane says here, right before getting a massive rock thrown into her head, and so Jane says here, right before getting a massive chunk of rocks thrown into the side of her head, where the hell did I put that ammo clip? which is just sad. So Jane gets seriously injured. She takes a very hard hit to the side of the head, and John is understandably concerned. He looks at her and tries to diagnose what's going on, but he really just thinks that she's going to die. And she ends up not dying, spoiler alert, but that's where his head is at. He is thinking that this is the same exact thing that just happened, well, that happened with Kathy. So he is able to carry her to the command center, the one that has been taken over by the Ray that was originally the humans, by effectively carrying her on his back and protecting her the whole way there. There's a long action bit, but John actually doesn't describe this in a very in a way that gives this a lot of importance. In fact, when he gets to the command center, it says, the tracking system had no idea that in just a couple of minutes it was going to be nothing more than a bundle of broken wiring, thanks to an upcoming ray shell. All our work in securing the damn thing was going to go to waste. So, we've talked a couple of times about how this book is written with a little bit of a journalistic style, as far as sometimes we get these little hints that John is writing about this in his diary, such as the points when he references things having happened in weird tenses, particularly the old farts dying. So when he goes ahead and spoils the ending of this mission in the middle of the mission by saying that the tracking system gets destroyed, because that is not the important bit of this. It's not the... Thematically, again, this book is about a man who misses his wife, and he is concerned about Jane's safety. And it stinks that the tracking system gets destroyed, but that's not what this is about, and probably if you were reading this, you are much more concerned with whether Jane is going to live than whether the tracking system is going to make it back into the hands of the humans. So John is able to find a stasis pod, which is what Jane put him in when he was seriously injured, and put Jane in it, and she basically has a hallucination. Not even basically has a hallucination. She has one. She sees Kathy, who holds her face, and John is able to see this through her eyes, through their brain health. And so Jane wakes up for just a few minutes, or just a few lines actually, and John tells her what happened to her, and Jane tells him that she saw Kathy. Says, I saw Kathy, she spoke to me. John says, what did she say? She said, and then drifted a little before focusing in on me. She said I should go farming with you. So at first glance, you read this as a hallucination, that Jane is seeing Kathy tell her to go farming with John, something she said she didn't want to do, because deep down she does want to do it, and she's thinking about the things that she would regret if she died here. But the interesting thing here is that there is a tiny bit of ambiguity thrown in by the writing, which I am 90% sure is deliberate. I could actually just be misinterpreting this part, but when John sees the hallucination through Jane's eyes, he says, flicker, flicker, and she looked like she looked the last time I saw her. As in, he sees Kathy through Jane's eyes, and she looks like she did the last time John saw her, which was way after the wedding photo that John showed Jane. So the implication here is that there is a tiny sliver of a chance that something metaphysical is going on with this hallucination, and that Kathy, the original, does actually have some kind of connection to Jane. I'm not really sure what is trying to be said here, but it is interesting that that was thrown in there. It also gives us like a final connection to Kathy, the original, in this emotional climax of the book. So John is able to get the schematic for the tracking system and run away with Jane back to the command of the Special Forces, where they are able to get her onto a medevac. And Major Crick tells him that he is going to be Major Crick, well, first he promises that he and Jane will be on the same shuttle, which doesn't happen. But he also alludes to the fact that John will be promoted to captain. And the thing is, this is treated with about as much weight as most of the fight up to this point, which was apparently 90 minutes, but was only about 5 pages. This whole book has been largely about John effectively being carried along by this huge rushing river. He is able to scrabble at these pretty rocks that he sees along the way, but for the most part, things just happen to him in this like whirlwind. He enlists in the military, but it's a while before he actually starts to show agency. For the first third of the book, he's effectively being babysat by the CDF. He has to take tests. He has to eat their food, and then once he is actually in the military for real, he has some damn good ideas. But other than those ideas, things are shoved on him. He has no control over where he's going. He has no control over what happens to his friends. He's promoted to squad leader because of something he did like 60 years ago that he doesn't do now. He's the sole survivor of his ship for reasons that are largely luck. It's awesome that he was able to contribute there, but of the people on his ship, he survived for no reason other than chance. On his transport, he stumbles on the schematics for the tracking system only while he's trying to save Jane. This book is about somebody basically being tumbled around and grabbing for whatever they can. And this promotion to captain is just another one of those another one of the things on that long list. We progress to chapter 18, and the first sentence is, "I made captain. I never saw Jane again." So remember when we talked about Maggie was the first of the old farts to die, which is a sentence that takes away all of your hope for Maggie's survival so that you can instead be hit by the emotional impact of her death without being distracted by looking for a way for her to live? This sentence does the exact opposite. It makes you anticipate why he never sees Jane again or what is going on there for the entire chapter, and it's the last thing that's addressed. It forces you to pay attention. The same way that was handled with everybody remembers where they were when they first found out about the Coral Massacre, right? It makes you intensely curious about what happened here and what is going on. It's good writing. John is promoted to captain because of the several achievements that he had during that battle. The schematics that he rescued go to Harry, and Harry basically confirms to everybody that the Kansu are extremely technologically advanced, and these schematics demonstrate that. And then it says, it was rumored that the Ray returned to Kansu space, imploring the Kansu for more technology. The Kansu responded by imploding the Ray's ship and hurtling it into the nearest black hole. I know there are a couple other books in this series. I don't know anything about them. Pretty sure we're going to see the Kansu again, but it's fine. I don't feel like we had to resolve that this book. I think something would have been lost in this if we had just exterminated a whole race of the Kansu instead of dealing with, or at the same time as dealing with the Jane stuff. It would have been a very different and probably lesser book if that had been the case. So they put John on really cushy assignments where he's, it says, sitting in a lot of parades and judging a lot of cooking contests. And then they have him ride on the new recruit transport ships. So he looks down at the old people and tells them to have fun for a week, and then tells them that 3/4 of them are going to die. It says, this tour of duty was almost unbearably bittersweet. But he eventually decides that he wants to go back to combat. And the interesting thing here is, even though he told Jane that he wants to retire at the end of his 10 years, he effectively makes the same decision he made at the beginning of the book here. At the beginning of the book, he was a retired man, and he decided that he wanted to go fight. In this, he is able to be effectively retired, sit around most of the time, visit parades and cooking shows, and he decides that he wants to rejoin the military. He looks back effectively on all of his experiences, including the long recruiting process, which was the first half of this book, and he decides that he's going to do it again. The events of this book were hard for him, but he doesn't regret it. It was what I agreed to be and to do. I intended to give it up one day, but until then, I wanted to be on that line. I was given a company and assigned to the Taos. It's where I am now. It's a good ship. I command good soldiers. In this life, you can't ask for much more than that. So this is the payoff for all of those little journalistic touches throughout this book. He has been recapping for us what has happened over the course of his life. And judging by what we've seen over the course of this entire account, is that he has a large amount of sorrow for the past, but he also has this hope for the future. And that's what this book is supposed to leave you with, which is what we cover from here on out. He tells us about what happened with Jane, which was that they were separated. They were not put on the same shuttle. And by the time he was able to get to the same ship that she was in, she was so locked away because she's special forces that he couldn't reach her. So in the allegory of the river, where that has been John's life throughout this book, him being able to connect with Jane briefly is effectively like him being able to grab a very large rock and hang on to it for a little while he's still going down the river. At the end of it, he's still on his journey, but having hold of that rock for a little while was enough to change his course, at least slightly. He says that when he sees special forces, they send him little bursts of respect over their brain pals because they recognize him. They have decided to accept him as one of them. And as alluded to earlier, acceptance is something that you can only get from the group that you want to be accepted by. You can't just declare yourself accepted. It wasn't until he won a mission for them and saved the life of one of their best soldiers that they accepted him into their ranks, metaphorically, because he had been kicked out. Even though John hasn't seen Jane anywhere. He did receive a message from an anonymous sender. It's a picture of a farmhouse and what he interprets as a sunrise. This postcard is sent with a voice message, and the voice message is about how she knows what special forces are able to do when they retire, which is go to this idyllic landscape where they spend the rest of their years. And since we've been talking about afterlife imagery throughout this entire book and themes of rebirth and reincarnation with the Kansu, I think that it is relevant to say that this image she sends of this idyllic farmhouse that she would like to spend the rest of her existence with John on, I think the comparison to a heaven is definitely there. It's where the ghosts go after they're done being ghosts. And after this she says, "Part of me was once someone you loved. I think that part of me wants to be loved by you again and wants me to love you as well. I can't be her. I can just be me. But I think you could love me if you wanted to. I want you to. Come to me when you can. I will be here." So Jane has found some amount of peace. She has accepted that she is a new person, but she still has a bit of Kathy in her. And she's, at this point, being completely honest with John. She's not telling him she's not Kathy. She's not telling him that she is Kathy. She's accepted herself as her own person who still has a connection to John and the original Kathy. And as much as this book has been from the perspective of John, Jane was probably the person who was most changed by the events of these last 6 chapters. She has reached a form of catharsis that she was unable to reach before the events of this last third of the book. So John says, "I haven't seen her again, but I know I will, soon enough." And this is the hope that I referred to that the book ends on. John is all right with his lot as a captain in the CDF, as long as he has something to look forward to, as long as he has hope, which was something that he was completely missing at the beginning of this book. Which he told everybody about the hopelessness that he felt from seeing his body degrade. He has something that he can look forward to, and he has someone he can look forward to seeing. And that is really all that he wanted. And that was Old Man's War by John Scalzi. Overall, I really liked this book. There wasn't a lot that I can relate to about John as a person, but the emotional themes were conveyed in such a way that I felt for him and I rooted for him at each major turn. I will be reading the remaining books in the series, but I'm not going to do a deep dive on them like this. I'll probably just do some shorter reviews each time I finish one of them. So the next book that I'm going to be doing a deep dive like this on is Planetfall by Emma Newman. But I'm going to be taking a little break between now and then. In the meantime, I will be covering some shorter, less structured reviews of Pact by John McCrae. There's already a deep dive series for Pact, which I am listening to, so I don't want to go over retreaded ground, but I am going to be talking about some of my thoughts as I go through that, so those episodes should start coming out by the end of the week. Thanks for watching, and see you at the next one.